everyone. I'm your host Sanazia and welcome to another exciting episode of Mental Health Forum. And you know that we start this program in collaboration with Savera and CCHR. The purpose of us doing this show is to educate people on various issues to do with mental health and psychiatric human rights abuse. We need to do so because we want to educate people so they can make informed choices in regards to the mental health and well-being of ourselves and our families. And I'm really thankful to all the viewers of A1 TV because they are getting our message, and your response shows that you are liking our shows as well. So thanks a lot for your response and liking our show, and this give us a sort of encourage that we are on the right track, and the purpose or aim of the show is fulfilling. So now I don't want to drag it too long. So let's welcome my co-host. Yes, she is back again. Thanks. Last time I missed her in my last show. So let's welcome my co-host. She is Executive Director of Citizens Commission Human Rights Melbourne. So let's welcome Kim Kulin.
Sana, hi everybody. How are you?
Yeah, I'm fine. Hi Kim, and welcome back. I really missed you, and even all the viewers missed you in our last show.
Oh, that's good. I'm glad that I was missed. That means I'll come back again next week.
Yeah.
So we need to get lots of likes and lots of comments for today.
Yes. And today, Kim, we both know we are really excited because our guest is not from Melbourne. He's from New Zealand, and he is your counterpart in New Zealand, basically, isn't it?
Absolutely, he certainly is. He's
Yeah.
done a lot of work in New Zealand, been a very busy man.
Yeah. So before we introduce him, let me just tell you, a little bit about our today's guest. He is Mike Ferris, Executive Director, Citizens Commission on Human Rights, New Zealand. Mike has worked with CCHR since 1990, and since then he is involved in exposing several violations of human rights in New Zealand mental health system. He co-authored the complaints submitted to the United Nations Committee Against Torture, which resulted in the committee criticizing the New Zealand government late last year and urging them to open new investigation into the alleged torture of children in Lake Alice Psychiatric Hospital in the 1970s. As a result, a new police investigation had started along with the New Zealand Royal Commission of Inquiry into abuse in care setting, stating that they are making a case study of the abuse at Lake Alice. So that is just a brief introduction, and as Kim mentioned, there is a long history to discuss, so I don't want to waste more time. So let's welcome our guest for tonight, Mike Ferris. Hi Mike, welcome
Hello.
to TV.
Thank you. Thanks for
Hi,
inviting
Mike.
me.
Thanks for coming
Mike,
across the pond.
You're very welcome, and this is quite a nice way to do it.
Absolutely. It's a lot easier.
For sure.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Mike, for coming to our show. And Mike, as I read your bio, I was horrified that there was a psychiatric hospital in New Zealand for children and they tortured them. So can you just share the story with all the viewers, how can you find that, what is happening in that hospital, or actually what happened, what is the story?
Well, Lake Alice is a psychiatric hospital, or it was operating in the Wanganui area in the 1970s, and there was a child and adolescent unit that was established under the psychiatrist by the name of Selwyn Leeks, and his aim was to treat children in his unit. But what he was doing was essentially some bizarre, let's say experimental, but essentially it was abuse, where he was using an electric shock machine, not only to the head of the children and without anesthetic, but he was also using the shock machine to various parts of their bodies, and it was a form of punishment. And along with that, they also used the drug formaldehyde, also as a form of punishment. It's apparently a very painful drug when it's administered. So this was a regime that he had established, and you could say it was torture. And we said that it was, and hence the Citizens Commission on Human Rights was actually our group first of all published what was happening in Calais in '96, as early as that. And there was a couple of inquiries, but they were very, very watered down, and they found no wrongdoing. And those inquiries took place in 1977 and 1978. And at the end, and around 1978, or the end of 1978, Dr. Leakes took off to practice in Melbourne. And so he escaped any formal investigation or any further investigation here in New Zealand. By the mid-1990s, what were children of Lake Alice were now adults. Some of them were coming forward and laying formal complaints once again, and even civil suits. And this culminated in the year 2000 when a class action suit was established in the High Court, and the government settled out of court with what they called ex gratia payments to the victims, numbering about 95 of them. They paid out $6.5 million and then said anyone else can come forward and make, if they were a victim of what happened at Lake Alice, they could come forward and make a claim as well. And about another 90 or so came forward.
Wow.
And they paid a similar amount.
Oh.
And so this was a huge compensation claim. But then many of the patients, and including our group, said, well, this actually isn't going far enough. Because of the dramatic use of the abuse, this should really go to the police. Also, a retired High Court judge wrote an unauthorized report on what he considered, what he found out happened at Lake Alice, because he was interviewing a large number of patients. And so his report was made public eventually, and it described, perhaps for the first time, just the nature of what was really going on there.
Wow.
So we encouraged police complaints to be filed, but that resulted in 8 years of a police investigation and no charges laid. But then examining the police investigation, it was quite ridiculous how little they really investigated the case. By this time, CCHR was making representations to the United Nations Committee Against Torture, saying what was happening here. And they were urging the New Zealand government to take much stronger action and actually to reopen a police investigation and do it properly. It never happened. So by 2017, one of the patients worked with CCHR, and we filed a formal complaint on his behalf to the United Nations Committee Against Torture. We showed that we had exhausted all of the local legal remedies, which is a requirement of the UN. And then they took up the case, and after 2 years of toing and froing with submissions from the government and then us resubmitting and so forth, they came out in our favour and said there is a case to be answered for, a new police investigation should take place, and following that, further another look at the redress and compensation, and to make the decision widely known. And we're right in the middle of that process right now. The police have opened a new investigation, and this time, finally, they're taking it seriously.
Yeah.
Wow, that's phenomenal. So you think this time, Mike, that the police investigation, last time they just basically whitewashed it. So the difference The difference now is because it's under the United Nations. Is that correct? And they've been directed. The government's been directed by the United Nations. How does that procedure actually work?
Yes, well, it must be because of the United Nations decision. Well, we know it is that the new police investigation is underway, and I guess that's called pressure. And here we are living in this, some would say, a somewhat idyllic country. It's a liberal democracy, and yet at a time when we were, 1970s, okay? We were supposed to be a civilized nation, and yet here's some very vulnerable children being horribly abused. And if you can't address that properly, no matter how long ago it took place, if you can't address it properly, then where are we as a civilization, as a group of people, as a country? And so the United Nations really ask the hard questions and push for a proper procedure, as in this case a police investigation, with the view that this should never ever happen again. And while people might say, well, of course it wouldn't happen again, but without really understanding the past, how can you prevent these things happening in the future?
Absolutely. So it's all really a lot about accountability, isn't it? And it's sort of like with CCHR, Citizens Commission on Human Rights, this is part of our mandate that we do all around the world. So we're interested in exposing and stopping these sorts of human rights abuses. And one of the ways that we do that, of course, is to get cases to come forward. So from what you've said, there was 95 victims plus another 90, so 185 total kids were victims of torture by Selwyn Leeks and his cohorts, which is pretty horrendous. So I was just interested to know, how did you get these cases to come forward? What was the actual procedure to get people to, like after 30 years, of living in trauma or whatever, to finally come forward and say, yes, I was one of those people that was abused as a kid?
Well, yes, that's the 185 that did come forward under the two, what we call payouts, round 1 and round 2 payouts. But in fact, it's been estimated that there are about altogether 350 children that went through Lake Alice. And so there were many more that never came forward. And some of them are coming forward now, actually, and talking to authorities and talking to us. And how did we get them to come forward? Well, of course, once that class action suit started in the late 90s and into 2000, that was making the news, and people were coming forward, and there was a lawyer working a class action suit, and he amassed the first 95 or so. And then when the government announced that they would pay out further compensation to anybody that came forward, well, this was now also nationwide news. So this was the media working and disseminating what was happening. And CCHR has been, thoroughly acknowledged in our work, which really spans something like 45 years of working on the case.
Wow.
And going back through old records, in fact, one of our key researcher, he co-authored the complaint with me. His name's Victor. He had interviewed some of the Lake Alice complainants when they were children. So the first affidavits that were written around 1978, 79.
Wow.
Yeah.
Going back that far.
That shows the pain and the journey of the victims as well, Mike, and plus we really appreciate the effort CCHR put, to help those victims to come forward. But Mike, I want to ask, as you already mentioned, that there are so many people and they are still, like, now people are coming and they said they are also the victims. But can you define the age group? Like, you said that they've been shocked, and then even they are drugs and all that. So is there any defined age group, like from this age to this children is being victimized by this psychiatric hospital? And then also I was wondering of the years it took for this to come to light. So if you can just briefly discuss.
Sure. The ages were around 12, 13, 14, up to 16. But there were some that were younger, and we've discovered that the youngest was 4 years of age.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Which is terrifying.
It is.
We talked about our role in, helping bring this forward and really just persistence in terms of making sure something is happening. The victims of the abuse, perhaps a better word is the survivors, those who have survived. Some of them have passed away. But the survivors, the people that are working to put things right, in a way, well, they are the real heroes of the story. They are the people that have said, that wasn't okay, and we want to do something about it. And they've worked with us. We've taken a case to the UN and representing. And there's another case before the UN right now from another Lake Alice survivor. And that's due to be assessed very shortly. But these are the guys and girls, women, who are, I'd have to say, very brave in terms of coming forward with their story, because the trauma that was enacted on them was horrendous, and they have truly suffered from what was done to them. So,
just a question. Sorry, just wanted to know. I wanted to ask you, what did these kids do to end up in this place? Like, I mean, I sort of, this is my, as you know, stepping back and like being a viewer of this, I'd be thinking, oh my God, these kids must have been so bad to be put in such a place. But were they? What actually? I can't imagine that a 4-year-old could have been that bad, other than maybe being a bit disobedient or a bit hyper on food or something like that. But so what happened? Why did those kids end up at Lake Alice? And is there any other institutions like this around that you know of, or in New Zealand or even in Australia that you've heard of, that they're doing this to kids or have in the past?
Look, Lake Alice was considered the worst. There were a lot of hostels and homes for wayward children, for young children, adolescents, and these homes were considered very abusive in themselves, and they were. And the state, I think, had a kind of a channel for easy access for kids with behavioural problems to end up in these places. A large percentage of them were Māori, and overrepresented once again inside an institution. And so the state had sort of created these channels to put kids with problems and saying, well, we'll take care of your child. But the care factor was sadly lacking. They were really places of punishment and abuse. And like I said, Lake Alice was the worst. It didn't get worse than Lake Alice.
Wow.
It's the nation's shame, actually, this place, and therefore it should be confronted. And what did the children do? Well, I think the children would do what children do, and the real help would have been to help those families, those parents and so forth, with proper measures, not some kind of institutionalized regime that ended up torturing them. That was just completely the wrong thing to do. And the nation has to confront that now, because even now Child Services in this country is nothing to write home about. In fact, it's quite abusive in the way that they remove children from families, and all under the name of mental health, by the way. That plays a large factor in terms of trying to define behaviour, and then by defining behaviour as a problem or a disorder, allows them to enact their treatments, which invariably do not work, and in most cases make the person worse.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow.
And that's really sad to know what is happening, because we never expect these kind of things in such countries where we are living at the moment. But still.
Well, that's true. I've got to say, just to add to that, no, we don't expect these things, and we're looking back 40 plus years at something that was a real horror story. You know, if you were to make this into a film, I think it would be a horror film,
Yes.
no question. But then I think our country, like your country, they will look back and go, well, yeah, this did happen, but it doesn't happen now. But I would beg to differ. There's still institutions in this country, and there's still children being removed from families and still being abused, not on such a wide scale, but we're finding that a lot of these kids that go into state care are put on psychiatric drugs. And that's in a whole new investigation that we're looking at, because they don't ask to be put on these drugs. They're just put on them as a behavioural control method, and it's got nothing to do with their mental health. It's just to do with easy management. And so you find psychiatric drugs not only in child welfare, you also find it in prisons and in places of detention. You find it in homes for the elderly. And so this is the abuse that's happening now, but people find that hard to confront.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and that's part of just what we need to be very aware, and we need to keep doing that. And this is why this has been so great to do this show, because it's bringing awareness to people that they wouldn't normally have.
Yeah.
Is that right, Sana?
That's right.
Yes. That's what we are doing. And then again, I just want to say that even Kim and the CCHR, they are doing great work in Melbourne as well. And the aim and the motto is same here, just to highlight or educate people. And that's why these guys are working really hard, and they are doing a great job.
Well,
Thanks,
thank you.
Sana. Yes, we'll get there.
Yeah. So you have a question for Mike, Kim?
Yeah, well, you had another question there about with the, we've been pursuing this for 50 years now.
Yeah.
Since 1970. So you're pursuing the justice for the people who were tortured at Lake Alice, for the children, and who are still living with the horror that they went through. So what sort of impact do you actually think that you're making on this? Is this going to be a worldwide impact, so that we actually have the United Nations recognising that children are being tortured, and it's time to, look at what's going on in these institutions, like what you're saying, in the state care, etc. And I know that's happening in Victoria, all around Australia, and all around the world. And there's just not enough people looking for it to expose it, I think, or letting others know what's happening. So what sort of impact do you see that's going to be made as a result of us doing these sorts of things? Mike, is it?
Well, I think bringing this case to the UN, the Committee Against Torture, and the committee upholding our complaint is a first. I don't think that's been done before against a psychiatrist who supposedly was practicing psychiatry, and he was certainly using the tools of psychiatry, an electric shock machine, which he was administering without anesthetics, the use of formaldehyde, and nurses were involved as well, I've got to say. And by actually taking it to such a high level, I think it will have a worldwide impact. It certainly can be a case that can be used in other places, other countries, if they want to bring their case to the UN. And this has set a kind of a precedent in that area. I think and what's important is how does that relate to what happens now? And does it make a difference to what's happening in mental health going forward? Well, we know that there's a big interest in the use of electric shock as a treatment. And when I say there's an interest in it, there are quite a number of people now saying that this actually electric shock should be stopped completely. It should not be used. It belongs to a bygone era, to a previous century. We should not be doing this in the 21st century. This is not the way that we should be treating people with problems. And so hopefully that this case actually has an impact in that area on electric shock and its use in general.
I certainly hope so. I would like to see that actually happen, because it's something I was talking to Mike the other day when we were discussing this show, and he said something very interesting, like, would you give your dog electric shock? And so if you wouldn't give your dog electric shock, why would you allow your mother, brother, father, uncle, grandfather, whoever, or someone else to have, or child to be given electric shock? And it just was looking at it in that light. I mean, you know, we very much against electric shock because of the damage, but I think that's for another show, that we can look at that and look at examples of that. Because we're running out of time now, are we, Sana? Have we got time for any more? Or?
Yeah, it's time to wrap up our show. But still, as you mentioned, there are so many things to ask. And like, you know, the story itself is really important to discuss. So I'm really thankful to Mike that, like, you know, he spared some time and discussed all this with us. And once again, thanks to you as well, Kim, that you thought that we should discuss these kind of stories, because it's really important to highlight and educate people that, look, you have to look around and see how you have been manipulated. So anything else you want to add on, Kim, or want to ask?
No, I just wanted to let people know that, you know, whether you're in New Zealand or, you know, Australia or anywhere in the world, if you've been subject to any psychiatric abuse or any adverse drug reactions, to contact CCHR. You know, our websites are fairly generic. You know, you can contact any of our websites and do and get the local CCHR from there and report your case, because it's only from people coming forward and telling their story that we can actually get legislation changed and actually get more human rights in for people all over the world. So I'd just like to thank Mike for coming. Really lovely to see you again, mate, and you're doing a fantastic job. And I'll pass you over to Sana.
Well, thank you.
Mike, thanks a lot. And I think the way you told and the way you discussed the impact is really important. Like, you know, I never assumed that, like, you know, as Kim mentioned, that you mentioned that, did you ever think of giving any sort of electric shock to your pet animal, or dog, cat or something? So how come we forget the pain of some of our relative, maybe father, mother, anyone, or even if it's on children? I think I can't even imagine the pain or the trauma they have. And once again, thanks to you and plus your team and all other people who come forward and highlight those social issues which need to be discussed. It's not for us, it is for our next generation as well. So once again, thanks for coming to our show.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks to you as well, Kim. And in the end, I just want to say that in the beginning we said that we want to educate people, and that's what we are trying. So there are so many other episodes yet to come in which we discuss all those things. If you have anything you want to discuss and all that, please, as Kim mentioned, if you want to register any for any of your, if you are a victim or something, please do email them as well. And in the end, just stay home, stay safe, and keep watching and keep supporting A1 TV.